Welcome everyone. We are now post shelter in place and I'm recording this on Saturday the 10th. I thought, since I'm over here, this is what I'm going to be talking about on the 11th, which is our first day that we get back to our normal services. And what I want to talk about today is Jesus teaching on prayer. Because I think that if you're anything like me, you have a lot of questions and wondering about prayer. I mean, I think I've questioned prayer more than anything else as I've, tried to stay close to God. It's just been a number one thing for me. Lots of questions I've had, is there a right way to pray? Can you pray for the wrong thing? Yes, you can. What about prayers that don't get answered? Or why does everything have to take so long? Is there a right way to pray? And I've noticed that in this passage, that's at Luke chapter 11, and I've never heard Jesus students ask this before. They ask specifically for a teaching on prayer. Now that's kind of unusual because if you know the New Testament pretty well, you'll probably not come up with another instance where his students asked particularly for a teaching on something. I mean, I can't think of anything apart from maybe when is the end? When will everything end, or how will it all end? I really don't know. Nothing's coming to my mind anyway. So there couldn't have been many times where they asked specifically. They said, teach us how to pray in verse 1, Luke 11. So that's just intriguing because from early childhood, these disciples would have been taught all about prayer. I mean, this is 2,000 years ago. It's an ancient Jewish culture. Actually, the whole lifestyle of the ancient people revolved around their faith. It is not like us today. Everything revolves around the faith and the festivals. So from a young age, the father of the household, patriarchal society, of course, the father would teach the children how to pray. And they would know things like the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. They would say it every morning and every evening. They would know the Hallel Psalms, the Psalms of praise. All the children would know the creation story in Genesis 1 through 5. Everybody would know that. All the feasts would be observed, like Passover and they had many, many different feasts. And it was not observing the way that often we observe, right? If we have an Easter meal, chances are, making a big assumption here, but chances are, for the most part, people aren't really going to be talking about resurrection and new life and transformation. They're going to be eating and watching TV or whatever you all do for Easter. The ancient people, they were very, very serious about their rituals and their feasts, because it was a way that God would remind them of what God does in their lives. So this just wasn't remembering something that happened. If they're remembering Passover, it's like, oh wow, yeah, God really can rescue us. God really can help us. This is a big deal. It makes a difference. So their faith of all the disciples, all the students of Jesus, completely centered around God and prayer. So the fact that they're asking Jesus, teach us how to pray, means that they've got a lot of questions and something's missing, right? And this is what I can relate to. In this passage, and I don't have time to go through the whole thing, I'm just going to point out one thing actually in this passage. This is what Jesus teaches on prayer. The first thing he teaches on prayer, the second thing he teaches on prayer, and the third thing, it's all the same, because he says this 3 times in this short paragraph. You need to know who you are speaking to. You need to understand the kind of God you are speaking to. If you don't have the right concept of God, you're not going to be praying. Period. You're not going to be praying. So he starts off and he says, when you pray, say Father. Now, Jesus spoke Aramaic, and he would speak Hebrew, and he would speak New Testament Greek. But he spoke in Aramaic, and the word for father in Aramaic is Abba. And Abba is all about relationship, right? So now, when we're talking about calling God Father, of course, lots of bells go off for people because they think, oh my goodness, if God's like a father, no thanks. Okay, it's not about gender. It's not really about gender at all, actually. God's way, way beyond gender. Goodness. But Father, it's the idea of, and you have to use, some of you will have to use your imagination. Especially if you didn't have a good father. What would the ideal father be like? Well, you might say, well, the ideal father would be compassionate and kind and gentle and loving and wise. Okay, God's saying, that's the kind of Abba we're talking about. We're talking about this kind of relationship as a good parent cares about a child, so Abba cares about you. You need to know who you are speaking to before you start to pray. Otherwise, you're not going to pray very much at all. Because so many of us have so many wrong ideas about who God is. So Jesus is saying, God is like the best parent you could imagine. Unconditional love. Unconditional love. Very hard to get your head around that if you think about that for 2 minutes. God is completely unchanging. Absolutely the same yesterday, today, and forever. There is no going back and forth with God. Like, one day I like you and one day I don't. One day I care about you, one day I don't. Oh, one day you're really good, I like you, next day you mess up, I don't really care for you anymore. Nothing like people that are fickle often, right? God is absolutely unchanging, gentle, strong, confident, kind. Now, I'm using human terms. Obviously, God is more than a human, but we're using these human terms to try and help us to get a concept of what God is like. Jesus is saying, first thing you need to know about prayer is who you're praying to. You're praying to Abba. That's who you're talking to. You're talking to Abba, who you can trust. Now, everything rests and falls on trust and trust, and many of us have a lot of trouble with trust. So Jesus spoke a lot about trusting God because he knew that it's really hard for us to trust a God that we can't see. I mean, it really is going to be a constant struggle in life, isn't it? We're always going to have times where we're struggling to trust in this God that we can't actually physically sit down with and see. And so a lot of Jesus' teaching is on the character of God and who God is. So the first thing he says is, you need to know that God is like the very best parent. This is Abba we're talking about here. And the second thing he says is, and this is great, it's like, you have to learn how to trust God, because without trust, you'll never really be able to open up in any way. I mean, it's very similar to a person. If you're with a person that you really don't care for, you really don't trust, you don't believe a word they say. If you're with a person and you question their character, or you question their motives, or you just plain don't like them, there's no way you're going to be sharing anything intimate with them, right? There's no way that you're going to be opening your heart. You're going to be very guarded. You're going to be distant. You're going to protect yourself, and rightly so. Well, we take all these things into our spiritual lives too, and we do the same thing with God. So the whole idea of learning how to trust is very, very important. So Jesus says, let's start with this. You begin. And this takes time. All these things take time. We're speaking to Abba here. Now, in case we miss that whole concept, he comes around a second time with the same teaching in the same paragraph. He says, okay, here's another way. Let me tell you another way. Here's another way to look at God. Imagine this. Imagine you had unexpected visitors that came really late at night and they're hungry. Unexpected, they land on your doorstep, 11:30 at night, oh my goodness, but they're friends of yours, so you let them in. And they're staying the night. And you never got any groceries in. You're not prepared, right? And you're thinking, it's midnight. And you're thinking, oh my goodness, what am I going to do with these people in the morning? I don't have a thing in. I'm going to have to nip next door to my best friend. I'm going to have to ask for help here. I need something to feed these guests. So you go next door. Your best friend happens to live next door. You knock on the door. You have to go up and help me. You have to go up and help me. I've got these unexpected guests. Can you give me something? Give me a pizza, anything. They're starving. And your friend says, oh, come on. Everybody's in bed. It's late. Come back in the morning and I'll help. Oh, no, you've got to help me now. I think they're hungry. I need to offer them something to eat. And so your friend reluctantly gets up, your next door neighbor, okay, here's the pizza. Half asleep. Gives you the pizza and you go back and you feed your unexpected guests. Jesus says, can you imagine something like that happening? You think, yeah, I guess. I can imagine. Can you imagine that your friend would actually, because he or she's your best friend, he would get up and give you the pizza, right? He would do that, even though it was inconvenient, even though the children are in bed, even though your friend's half asleep, your friend's going to get up, give you the pizza so that you can feed your unexpected guests. Can you imagine something like that happening? Yes, I can imagine something like that happening. Okay. If your best friend can be good to you, how come it's so hard for you to believe that God, who is your best friend, is good to you also and would withhold no good thing from you? Jesus says, how come that's so difficult? If you can believe that your friend would be inconvenienced, and oh, by the way, God is never inconvenienced, but if you can actually believe this scenario or this story I just told you, how come it's so hard for you to believe that God would want to do good things for you? Why is that? Yeah, it's like, why do you think the worst? What is it about human nature that sees the worst? What is it? Why do humans project the worst thing on God? Why is that? Right? First thing you need to know, this is Abba. The second thing you need to know, this is like your best friend. Why are humans always so quick to project the worst thing on God? What is that about, you know? It's like, disciples, remember who you're praying to. Remember who you're praying to. You need to know who you're praying to. I mean, I wondered if their concept of God was way off, the disciples, the students. I mean, I wonder, this is just my imagination, but I wonder if over the years, as we have done too, the same thing, I wonder if over the years we project all the shadow side of the human self onto God, and then we see God as critical, we see God as revengeful, we see God as distant, we see God as punishing and violent because we're punishing and violent. We see God as cold because we can be cold to people that we don't like. We see God as favoring one person in comparison to another because we can so easily do that because we have favorites. I wonder if that's why the disciples need to hear this, that this is Abba we're talking about here. This is not anything like a cold, distant, revengeful, punitive, violent, punishing God. It's like, that's how people are. That is not how God is. It's great. I've never seen this before, because in verse 11, this is so good. Look at that verse 11. The same thing. He comes around a third time, and it's like, okay, you're a parent, right? Or you're a grandparent, or you have children in your life that you care for. Okay, if one of these wee ones came up to you and asked for a fish, would you give the wee one a snake? You'd say, of course not, that's ridiculous. Okay, Jesus says, okay, if you know how to care for your children, how much more will Abba care for you? If you know how to look after a little one, imperfect as you are, right? And we'd all agree, yeah, I'm imperfect, right? I mean, we get that. We've figured that out, right? If you know how to look after a child, actually you could do it for a pet too. Since I've got this new puppy, I'm kind of tuned into needs of needy creatures. If you know how to look after that wee one, how much more does God know how to look after you? Because God is like the best Abba. God is like the best friend, the best. God is, well, God is above all of these things. But you see do you see why it's so important that Jesus keeps stressing, before he even teaches us how to pray, by the way, he's saying you got to get the idea right of who God is. Because there's no way you're not going to tell God your fears and release your fears to God if you don't trust. Right? You're not going to do that. You're not going to wait on God for guidance before you make decisions, before you make any kind of important decision in relationships, in your life, in your job. You're not going to do that. You're not going to rush on ahead. If you honestly believed that there is a God who is actively there and wants to help you, you wouldn't do that if you had a trusting relationship with God. If we truly knew who God was, we would have less difficulty releasing our fears. We're always going to have difficulty, but it might be a little bit easier, right? Because we've built up over the years, God can be trusted. God is faithful. So there's the heart cry for prayer. For Jesus' teaching, first step, second step, third step is all about knowing who God is. And for many of us, and I've had to do this a lot throughout the years, it's letting go of old ideas and concepts and teachings that are inadequate or just plain wrong. Some teaching is just inadequate and it's unhelpful. And some teaching is just wrong and damaging to people. And we can pick these teachings up in a variety of places. You don't even have to be in a church setting to pick up wrong ideas about God. I've spoken to people who never set foot inside a church and they have the strangest ideas about God. So somehow we manage to do this by ourselves sometimes. But there's the heart cry for this passage, I think. There's the heart cry that God, reveal to us who you are. Give us a greater understanding of who you are so that we might learn how to trust you. Amen.